And now for today's amazing program. What Cookbooks won't tell you, 10 burning questions in food. Join Los Angeles chef Daniel Holzman and food writer Matt Rodbard for an afternoon of fast-paced food questions and answers from two varied points of view, a chef and a food writer. When is it okay to cook with frozen vegetables? Should I cook with MSG? Why is the farmer's market so expensive, and do I need to weigh my coffee? These two gentlemen are going to be answering those questions in just a few minutes. Daniel Holzman is the chef owner of DTLA's Danny Boy's Famous Original, right across the street from us, and previously ran the Meatball shop in New York City. So please check out his pizza. It's delicious. And Matt Rodbard is the founding editor of the online food publication Taste, a winner of 2 James Beard Awards. Together, they will answer the 10 most burning questions in food today before opening the floor to additional questions from the audience. So now let's welcome to our LA-made stage, Danny and Matt.
There you go. Thank you for coming on such a nice day.
I got these pants from my big brother. He's 5 years older than me, and he recently lost some weight, and so I got his fat outfits as hand-me-downs. And I'm a little taller than him, so
you've got the beautiful
my
stripes.
wife helped me pick out good socks, but
okay,
just so you know, I apologize for the socks.
No, I love the socks. So we're going to go through our intros, just a little bit about why we came together to write Food IQ, and then get into 10 questions. Now, of course, our book has more questions than 10, but we felt these 10 were kind of the most commonly asked when we're hit up on the street or on the podcast that I host or in your restaurant. You always ask questions. But first, I think it's important. This is the book that we wrote, Food IQ. We released it a year ago. We wrote it during the pandemic. That was an interesting time to write a cookbook.
I think that cookbook saved my financial life, but
Yeah.
really saved my life.
Yeah,
we had something to do the whole.
We had something to do.
We were very, very busy the whole time. It was so nice. So nice to have a project that has no chance of getting finished.
And you know, when we started pitching the book, the biggest question was, why the two of you? Like, what's up with that? Well, we've known each other for 10 years. You know, we've been friends. I wrote about Daniel's restaurant, the Meatball Shop. Anybody been to the Meatball Shop? Hands up. Yeah. Got some people here. Okay. All right. Now, it was like, why the two of us, like chef and writer? Well, it made sense because my job is to ask questions all day, every day. And your job is to answer them because you're also asked questions.
You know, I'm supposed to cook.
Yeah, but also people are like at your restaurants asking you a bunch of things all the time, right?
I feel like, you know, both of us, I run into the exact same. Our friends call us, our family calls us, random folks send us DMs saying, I've got this, you know, piece of salmon, how am I supposed to cook it?
Exactly.
And it's so often that you get the same questions, and we talk about them, and we argue over them, and we help each other with them, that we felt like maybe there's some greater audience that would be interested.
Yeah, and we figured the best way to kind of format the book was question, answer, and then a recipe to kind of articulate the answer in real life. It wasn't just the answer; it was like dinner, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, like I think there's like this trifecta of learning. Like kind of like they're auditory and visual learners, and they do that in school where they write it on the blackboard. In cooking, it's like first it's trying to understand why you're doing what you do, and that helps you to really internalize what's going on. And then it's kind of like watching somebody else do it, and then maybe getting to do it yourself. And if you kind of follow the steps of learning about the why, reading and watching somebody else do it, and then actually going through it yourself, it really becomes knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes muscle memory in some cases. You were talking about like slicing an onion or shallot.
I think you gotta do a couple more than one though.
Yeah, a couple more. Like you gotta do like a couple of boxes. And like a little bit about our background. I'll go back, Daniel, as Kevin introduced. Daniel's a chef here in Los Angeles. Danny Boy's Famous Original is your restaurant just down the street. And I'm a food writer. And I run Taste, and you know, as I was saying before, you
didn't fix that picture.
No, well, so this is me in Ethiopia on an assignment, and then there's a photo of me interviewing a chef because we were debating on the slides. I was like, You were like, "There's no
We're going
photo."
through the slides, and I'm like, there's just a random picture of two guys in sub-Saharan Africa,
Right.
and I don't understand how that's you as a writer.
Yeah, it needed that little drop in. So you see in the top right, I actually added.
Oh,
the
so
photo.
you
That is
wrote a
me.
different person
That
from a
is
different place
That is
and
an
time.
updated slide that we just did. There.
Fair enough.
But again, there's something about like when we come together, there's power there, and I think in this presentation, we're gonna go over 10 questions to start, and then hopefully within I think the next like at the end like 15, 20, we'll take some questions from the audience. I know Kevin has one about potatoes. We're gonna get into that. So our book has 100 questions. I thought that was a round number. It could have been 1,000. I don't know. How did we came up with 100 because I guess we had to.
I think it was great for the title.
It was just part of the
Like
proposal.
100 questions
Yeah.
for your friend the chef. But
Yeah.
there's many more recipes, and there are more
Yeah.
questions than 100. But I think that was really,
We broke it down to 100, and we kind of thought through like how do we organize this. So we got into like these categories like tools and technology. There's so many questions about gear we get all the time, about ingredients.
I've got what's the best knife that I should buy
all the
or-
time. We're not going to go over that today,
you
but
know, or what should I buy an air fryer? All these questions that people really, and then the reality is that as a chef, you take for granted so much of this, and as a food writer,
Yeah.
maybe you overcomplicate some of it. And when we really study and get into it,
guilty for overcomplicating. Not me personally, but the industry.
Yeah.
I'm never guilty of overwriting, but no, I'm kidding. All right, so we're going to get into these questions. I think we're going to try to get through them all and be pretty brisk. We could definitely ramble about some of these. But the first question, okay, the single most important piece of cooking gear. I will start, I have a definitive answer. To me, it's a digital scale.
Why is that? Why is that the most important for you? Because you feel like it keeps you consistent, you can follow a recipe, or?
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
I think a digital scale is undervalued in the kitchen. It's only around $15. Scali does a one that's like $25. It's pretty cool looking.
They come in many colors.
But the point is that the digital scale for baking recipes in particular, many cookbook writers are doing both volumetric measurements and weight measurements, so grams. It just makes baking easier when you have a bowl and you're adding your flour, your
The
dry.
reason that I think that that's a bad answer.
Okay, we're gonna.
Is,
This is you. Now you
it's
answer the question.
obviously like the most important piece of cooking equipment is a piece of cooking equipment that you could not cook without, right? So like,
Okay.
if you were to go to a deserted island, deserted island,
Yeah.
either way, you wouldn't choose the digital scale. You wouldn't be like, I got my scale with me. We're gonna be good here.
All right. Answer the question. Answer the question.
I think that realistically, you need a few tools, but the bigger, more important takeaway is less of good quality is definitely more.
Yeah.
And people are constantly getting sold on gadgets and big sets of knives. And you just if you really think through to yourself, there are 2 or 3 pots and pans and 1 or 2 knives that you use for 95% of everything. And so, you just don't you go to people's houses and they've got the jars filled with like a million spatulas and all
like
this
the 18
stuff.
spatula households. Yes,
And
I
it's
know
like
those households.
you need space on your counter. The one thing is bowls. Bowls you can't have enough of. Big bowls are that's my one thing. Go crazy on the bowls.
I think the bowls are good. We do talk about organization in the book, but I will say I agree with you. We overemphasize the gear that you have to have, like this list. I just think
I'm going to choose fire.
there
The
you
most
go.
important tool you need for cooking, I'm going to bring fire with me.
All right, number 2. Should I cook with MSG? Now, many have written about this topic, and we're going to be moving through it quickly, but to be honest, it is one of the most polarizing products out there, I would say, right now. I would say one of the most. Gluten-free flour. maybe
Talking
so.
about cooking with MSG is kind of it's like culinary suicide. You get in, there are just people that immediately will write you off for not, because they feel so strongly about it.
Yeah.
And it's misinformation, unfortunately, that's driven by, years of xenophobia. I mean, it's
Truly.
actually this is really misinformation. And
Yeah.
and it's a bummer because it's one of the greatest ingredients. And chefs are discovering it and using it.
So you see how big that jar, that is like an industrial jar or container of MSG. You can get the small Ajinomoto, shakers, but that's like the one that you get for Restaurant Depot. But the point is with that image is that chefs cook with MSG all the time. And just like to kind of, further what you're saying, there was something called Chinese restaurant syndrome that was furthered through the Journal of American Medicine in like the 1990s, and there was like this link between MSG and headaches, which has been clearly debunked by many, and as Daniel said, is very xenophobic, and it was like very negative towards the Chinese American community and the restaurant owners, and
not to mention for the last 30 years, those of us who love Chinese food have been robbed of the deliciousness because all the restaurants had to stop using one of the best ingredients.
It's
crazy.
And also, while that was happening, we were eating Doritos, we were eating like crackers, we were eating lots of like processed and packaged foods had MSG.
I think the big takeaway is how do we use MSG? We talk about it in the cookbook.
Yeah.
And first and foremost, MSG occurs naturally because there are free glutamates, they call them, which happen in most of our favorite foods like soy sauce and most of our favorite condiments, soy sauce and Parmesan cheese.
We refer to it as umami.
Products.
Yeah.
And when you add salt you get the free glutamates, and then the salt combined, and you get MSG naturally. So we are constantly adding MSG to our food, but we should feel comfortable going out and buying the actual product and playing with it. And the best way to start is by mixing 10% of your by weight or volume of salt with your MSG. So when I sprinkle my salt on my product, I'm also adding MSG.
Yeah, so what we're saying is there's an actual recipe to cook with MSG. You're not like sprinkling that jar like into the sauce or finishing with it like you would kosher salt, but there's an actual ratio that we're calling for. And that's really important because I think when I started cooking with MSG, I did what I said was wrong. I just sprinkled it. But we're saying, what was the ratio?
I think 10% is the 10% is the amount where when I taste the food, I'm like, oh, there's like a little extra something going on, but I can't pinpoint it. More than that, I start to get a bit of a mouthfeel that I can recognize.
Yeah.
And less than that, I don't think really,
It's good to it's kind of like taste some MSG straight up, and then cut it with salt at 10%, and then kind of like dial in that flavor. And as you said, there's like this savoriness that will be perfect at one level and then feel a little bit too over-seasoned. So.
And when you we're gonna keep. This is gonna be a 1 hour.
We gotta move.
When you work with MSG, I think the most important piece of the puzzle to consider is. This is it's like the way that when you taste something that doesn't have enough salt in it, and then you add salt, all of a sudden all of the flavors become apparent.
Yeah.
MSG is like a less salty salt. So it does that same thing, but it doesn't make the food have a saltiness to it.
Like the saltiness.
Yeah, so you get more flavor. Like we would add it, and people are like, which meatball do you like better, the one with or without? And they're like, well, that one's really spicy. That one's got lots more meat flavor. That you added more of the ingredients. And you're like, no, we just added MSG, which made your tongue.
Yeah. Moving on. So, question: why does pasta always taste better in the restaurant? Okay, and how do I do that at home? Okay, so we have this issue when we make pasta at home. There's something about it that isn't quite there. I think when cooking with a jar of pasta sauce, which is totally great, I've written about a lot on Taste. You're combining the drained pasta and the sauce, and you're marrying it. But there's something that's missing with that marriage. What is your answer to that question, chef? Who has made lots of pasta over your years?
What's the name of the book for there was the cook that worked for the journalist that worked for Mary Battalion that he wrote about? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's not Heat. It was a great cookbook.
Wait, Bill Buford?
Yeah, what was the name of it?
That was called Heat. Yeah, correct. Yeah, Bill
he
Buford.
worked for him, and he has this long chapter about learning to make pasta, and that was the first time that I reading that. It really I thought helped, and but he talked a lot about the salty water that the pasta cooks in a restaurant that becomes more and more starchy, and then you add it in. But I found. I don't want to debunk or disagree with it because he's a well researched. He's probably right.
Bill.
He's Bill Buford, but he sold a lot more cookbooks.
Yeah.
When you cook pasta at home, at least growing up, you cook the pasta. Maybe you heat up the sauce. You put the sauce on top of the pasta, and the two sit separately and rather than together. And in a restaurant, you cook the pasta to 90% of its complete. Mm-hmm. So if you read on the package, it'll say 12 minutes to al dente. You cook it for 11. And then you add the pasta to the sauce in the pan that's heating, and you cook it together. You finish it together. And there's this thing that happens where a great bowl of pasta, when you're finished with the pasta bowl, there should be no sauce left in the bowl. Yeah. Because it's not because people always talked about over saucing pasta. It's not that. It's because the pasta.
They've separated.
Yeah.
There's been a separation. So the word is emulsification.
Yeah.
The
word is stick to the noodles.
There's emulsification happening there. So there's a bind, and chemically they bind together with temperature and with oil, right? With fat.
Everybody knows that fat and water, they don't mix.
They don't mix, right?
But starch and protein can create an emulsification where they suspend and hold together. And so I think when you're cooking your pasta you're cooking your pasta in your sauce, and you're watching, and at a certain moment it kind of cooks down, and maybe you hear a little crackle, and that's when
there's an auditory cue. I agree with you. It's like a crackle. It's interesting.
It gets like a dull sheen to it, which is when you know that it's there, and that's when you stop. Then if it goes too far and it starts to spitter spatter and it gets greasy and you start to see the shine, people think, well, that's it. But if you add a little water to it, you can always...
You loosen it with that water. So actually you can correct your mistake. And that's why when you're at a restaurant, you see when pastas arrive, there's your server might look a little stressed. It's because there's a bit of a time...
It's because the chef was screaming at him.
Probably. As an aside, this is gnocchi with potato. We have a great recipe. I feel gnocchi at home is easier than you think. Right?
Gnocchi is just a great thing to make, and it's so much fun, and it's delicious, and I feel like it's one of those ones where people feel like it's going to be hard work, so it's unexpected.
Yeah.
And then we made that pistachio pesto, which is delicious.
Yeah, it's great. I think
and expensive. The pistachios their crop only happens once every other year. Yeah. So that's why it's real expensive some years, then it goes down.
And sometimes they're really bitter, which I think that happens with a bad crop, or they're just stale because they've been from 2 years ago.
Phenomenal.
One thing about pesto too, the basil pesto that we're known for, that pesto is known for, is the Ligurian pesto. But pesto doesn't have to be basil based. Pesto.
I don't want to speak to this because this is being live streamed, and then I think they're going to keep it in perpetuity. So I'm not sure, but I do. I don't know. I don't know what the definition of pesto is, where it came from.
They're kind of Ligurian pesto is a pesto.
Is that true?
Yeah, totally. Exactly. I'm totally sure. Right.
Could be true here. Look it up.
No, but I think the point is that pesto doesn't always have to have that heavy basil. Heavy basil note. You can use pistachios and
I always
cheese.
did. I always do I always did spinach and basil because I love the bright green, and basil is a little bit much for me.
Yeah.
And then I think that people use pine nuts, but pine nuts can be expensive, and I like walnuts. I like a walnut and spinach pesto a lot.
Have you heard about the pine nut bitter, the pine nut syndrome? So there's this thing, if you have a pine nut that's bad and you eat it, you can lose your taste for a year, up to a year. It's really freaky. Sorry, you should Google it. All right.
Listen, guys, I think if there's one thing to take away from today, it's be very afraid of pine nuts.
We have a lot of fear. But we also, later on, will be liberating you from fear. There is actually a point where we will liberate you from fear. All right, this is quick because we want to get through to 10.
Where are we at?
No, we're good. We're at 20 minutes. So, okay, olive oil strategy. So when we thought about olive oil, which is used all the time in home cooking, we wanted to say not all olive oil is created equally. And we've kind of broken it into 3 different types.
I feel like, we as Americans, those of us who are Americans, I think are born with this, more expensive is better.
Yes, always.
And so we're when we're unsure, we're well, we just spend a little more money and get the better one, and that way we'll be safe in our decision. But specifically with olive oil, the more expensive one is a different product, and it's made for a different use. And it can be not as good. So
Yeah.
like basically olive oil, the least expensive ones.
We'll call it like the workhorse olive oil, the cooking olive oil.
Light flavor,
Yeah.
great as a cooking oil, like you're sautéing, or for salad dressings.
Yep.
Where, the very expensive olive oils are deeply extracted, got a lot of very, very, very strong flavor, bitter and spicy notes. And when you mix them with acids, like for a vinaigrette or something, it can be very bitter and off-putting. Or if you cook with them, it's a terrible waste.
So that's the thing. Like we've got this olive oil. I like California Olive Ranch. I think that's like a really good baseline. You're cooking with that. You would never want. We call it fancy olive oil, more of a finishing olive oil. You wouldn't really want that in cooking, as you just said. But you also, you wouldn't want to like dip bread in that. You kind of want this, that like the fanciest, we call it like the highest, like you would want to like just drizzle it on as a finishing tool.
So you got your cooking oil that's like, it's hard to in here to think about it, but like I think of it as $10, $20, and $30 a liter. So you got $10 a liter oil, which is like for cooking and making salad dressing.
Per liter, yeah.
$20 a liter. Think about a Coke can.
Yeah.
And then think about the Coke bottle, and then imagine filling that with olive oil. Now dip your bread in it. And then.
Then the finishing. So like I think we got the bread one, and then we got the finishing one.
And the finishing one can be even more expensive than that.
And I think the key there is it's extremely spicy. So when you're getting an olive oil that has that really like intense flavor profile, you kind of don't want to dip bread in that and actually put like a tablespoon of it, and you want to like use it as a seasoning.
I literally drizzle a little bit over. Like the example that we have in the book is making this aglio olio pasta, where it's an olive oil is the one of the 3 ingredients in the
great
dish.
Recipe.
You cook with this less expensive olive oil, but then you finish it with the finishing oil to give it the flavor. We put it over soup at home, or the other day we celebrated Orthodox Easter, as many of us Jews do.
As many Jews do here on the stage,
and we had these kind of like beautiful dips that we finished with a little bit of the olive oil.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so this is that liberation moment. I didn't realize it was the next slide. So the question is, how do I know if the meat has gone bad? Now, there's like a 2-part answer. First, I think we had a long, passionate conversation about meat going bad. We're, as Americans, extremely scared of that expiration date and getting sick, and there's lots of fear there. But ultimately, when you think about meat, Daniel, there's we might be a little bit overcautious with stuff going bad, right?
Knowledge is power, and when we wrote this book, it was like, I feel confident making choices in the kitchen because I kind of know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
How can we share some of that confidence so that you can smell something and say, oh, it doesn't matter what the expiration date is, it's not good because it doesn't smell good, or it is still good even though it's passed.
Even though the date is passed. And I think the big takeaway I had was that, chicken sometimes can get that little funky smell. Rinse it off. It's going to be okay. Settle down. Like, that's kind of the takeaway, right? Like, don't throw that away if you're like one day off the go bad, right?
I mean, I'm sure that all of us at some point in our lives have had an experience with something that has truly gone bad. And I feel like there's in the kitchen we talk about, it's like, either you've got a cut that you need to go to the hospital for, or you need a Band-Aid for, and there's like no in between, and you always know which one it is.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been like, should I go to the hospital? You don't have to go to the hospital, because when you have to go to the hospital, you know for sure that you got to go to the hospital. Yeah. And it's like no one ever smelled a piece of chicken and was like, maybe I'm going to eat that. It's like either it's gone bad or it hasn't. And if you're wondering, it's okay.
Yeah. So rinse it off. That's the takeaway. The other thing about is oysters. We always think oysters are bad, but truly oysters are never bad, right? It was a takeaway.
I think that we did the math on it, and it's like if you eat a dozen oysters every day for the next 180 years, you get sick once.
Yeah.
So like you could be really unlucky. But, I'm down to take the odds on my dozen oysters 3 times a year.
Most food illness comes from unwashed greens and things that aren't like
salads.
Salads. That's where you get.
You know what it specifically is? It is the deer that is walking through the field, and the deer walks through the fields, and he steps in the fecal matter from other animals, and then he jumps the fence, and he's munching on the lettuce, and he leaves the dirty poop on the lettuce, and then the lettuce doesn't get properly washed. Once you cook the food, you're fine. Yeah, I think people associate when they get sick with what they ate last. And what they thought, so they're like, I ate some bad fish last night. And you're like, no, you ate like a salad 4 days ago, and or it was the salsa that was uncooked. It's always the uncooked thing, and that's why, like, when I travel through, some third world countries where they have less stringent health codes, where you're famous for getting sick. And you don't get sick if you just only eat cooked food. Period.
Yeah, it's true.
Always, it's the ice.
The other part of the other part of this question is we actually overcook our meat in America like consistently, and I think chicken in particular, we overcook chicken.
I don't want to get sued, but I would say that whatever the number is that it says on that package that is safe,
yeah,
you could undershoot that.
It's funny that you say it. Like, there is, in the book, we have some real, like, specific temperature guidelines, but I think in general, particularly with seafood, we overcook our fish.
Look, like, when there's that, the little turkey, the little popper that goes in the turkey, it's like, the turkey's ready. Yeah. That thing, by the time that thing goes off, we all know that turkey tastes like dry sand. And that's because we're overcooking it. And, I cook chicken and turkey to 130 degrees, 135 degrees. It says 165.
Yeah, the 165 is like a really troubling temperature. For me.
I'm like, steaks are 120 degrees plus rest over.
Yeah.
And so after it cooks, it's hot on the outside. Yeah. The heat starts to migrate in, right? It continues to travel. So your temperature is going to grow a little bit after you take it out of the oven. The bigger the piece of meat, the more it's going to grow, the more energy is stuck on the outside.
Yep. Okay, frozen vegetables. This is one of the first things we ever wrote about together when thinking about food science and cooking was this piece we wrote for Taste about 5-6 years ago. And it was like a real awakening when we were at Daniel's apartment in Williamsburg when you were living in New York, and we just went out and bought a bunch of frozen vegetables. And we were stunned.
I think this was like you and I saying frozen vegetables are embarrassing.
Are trash.
Are trash.
We were like really like so we went out and bought a bunch of great like bullseye asparagus, and we realized that actually frozen vegetables are really great in specific instances. And in fact, freezing technology over the past 5 to 10 years has improved so greatly that you're actually going to get better products, in particular peas and corn, frozen. And in restaurants, some restaurants follow this, certain other restaurants don't.
Look. This was the biggest shock for us, both of us.
Yeah, it really was.
I grew up in a home where frozen vegetables were not a thing. My mom was a healthy,
woman.
Organic, wonderful, and she wasn't a freezer section person.
Yeah,
and so I grew up with this kind of like real negative predisposition towards frozen vegetables, thinking that it's something that is just no good. Period. And when we thawed out those asparagus and they were like crispy and delicious and fresh, I thought, I'm really off base.
We made risotto with it, and so like things like corn fritters, or any time corn is being used in a recipe that's being cooked, use frozen, like always, almost always.
Except for August through September.
Yeah, and like sure, if you're gonna be at the market, we'll talk about farmers markets. Yes, get that corn and cook many different ways. But with peas, like I love pea fritters. I love that with ricotta. I love that.
I just think that in general, we grow up and we have a short lifespan, human beings, but technology is moving fast, and a lot of the truths that we learned as kids are no longer necessarily right anymore. Yeah. And canned and frozen vegetables, the technology's come a long way, and you should feel comfortable giving it a try. And look, man, I don't cook with frozen vegetables because I'm a chef, and I don't cook out of season because I love going to the farmer's market and cooking with what's available now, and that's one of my favorite things to do. However, don't be afraid of the frozen vegetable section.
Don't be afraid of it. And a note of cans, since we wrote the book, there's been like a great company called Heyday doing like the most amazing chickpeas and navy beans with sauce.
True?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
I still think you're embarrassing for using canned beans.
We have this question about using canned versus fresh or chicken.
We started this whole thing because I was making fun of him for using canned beans. I'm like, what kind of person?
Yeah.
You just soak them overnight. And plus, they're so expensive. It's environmentally an issue.
You trolled me publicly.
It's so expensive.
You trolled me publicly on my Instagram.
Has there ever been a moment when you're like, I'm in the mood for beans right now? You know, like you could, you know, it's like never like I need the beans this minute. It's like, yeah, you make beans tomorrow.
No,
Soak 'em.
man. Sometimes you come home from work and you want beans, and you open up that can. The soaking doesn't happen, chef. All right.
Fair enough.
Okay, so this question came up a lot when we wrote the book. We surveyed our friends and family, and we actually got this one. It was one of the most biggest questions, like why the f is the farmers market so expensive? I think really it actually starts with this statement: why is the grocery store so cheap?
Yeah, it's such a hard one that I toggle back and forth with because food is one of, if not the most important part of my life, and investing my disproportionately large amount of my money in in caring about the food that I eat comes naturally to me. And it's hard to say to somebody that is feeding a bunch of kids and has a limited budget that they should spend more on something. At the same time, it's really I see that you pay for the food in the supermarket not just through the checkout line, but through your taxes and farm subsidies, and in a lot of ways that kind of has skewed the real our understanding of how much milk or corn actually cost. And then, you go to the farmer's market.
And they're not getting those subsidies that the big ag are getting and at Gelson's or at Meijer or wherever you shop.
I guess what I would, how much would you charge me to grow an apple tree in your backyard, pluck them, wake up at 4 in the morning,
or 1,
drive down to Hollywood, and then sell me that apple? And, it's just not that expensive when you think about it from that perspective. Like some poor schmuck had to wake up at 2 in the morning to get here.
Yeah, it's true. And I just want to add quickly that the big egg thing is we answer it in as little words as possible. We only had a page, but we think it's an important topic to always keep in mind that, with food, these are small luxuries in our life. Like we live in a society where people will pay big time for a great car or a watch or the best liquor that's offered. But when we're talking about coffee, the best coffee in the world you can get for $28 a pound. Like truly the best that's been graded. That is a small luxury. Or like some of the best apples that you're ever gonna find in West Michigan. I'm biased. I think they make the best apples or grow the best apples.
Michigan?
West Michigan fruit belt. Yeah, shout out right there. I like that.
The best apples come from West Michigan?
They sure do, man. Yeah, right there. I got.
That's why that's like you've heard the saying Georgia peach or West Michigan
fruit
apple.
belt. We're a fruit belt. But so when thinking about, you're like reflexive. You're like, man, that coffee is so expensive, or man, that apple, man, I just spent $12 on apples. But you think back, like at the grocery store, it's just the math is not. It's not the same equation, right?
I don't know. I mean, I just go to the farmer's market, and sometimes I get shocked and frustrated because I feel like it's too expensive. And I even have to remind myself that, I don't know.
Okay.
I can't answer it. I don't know. I really don't know.
Really
it frustrates me.
No joke. This was a challenging, tricky question.
It frustrates me that it's so expensive, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, we all have like limited budgets. Like we don't want to be overcharged. It's like there's like a real ego element there. You don't want to be the sucker who's like paying because it was on Instagram, whatever. But agriculture is not like uniform, and like some seasons are better than others, and it's a really tough business. Let's move on to number 8. Why is my whole roast chicken always dry? Okay.
Remember that turkey question from earlier?
Yeah, this is related, but I think it comes down to this thing that Daniel told me through the process is like, we're like talking about like brining a pork chop. And he was just like, yo, you have to like season all of your meat in advance always. And I was like, yeah, that's actually very true.
Unfortunately, and this is like the worst thing that's going to come out of today's conversation, is you cannot cook meat that hasn't been seasoned in advance. And the bigger the piece of meat, the longer you have to cook it in advance. So like, it might be 10 minutes for a thinly pounded piece of al pastor, but it might be 2 days for a thick steak. Yeah. And once you kind of learn this and unlock it, it becomes impossible for you to cook your beans the same day.
Shade.
It's a real bummer because, if you like, I will not roast. If you were like, hey, what do you want to make for dinner tonight? Roast chicken? I'm like, no.
Yeah, if it hasn't
I
been
can make
seasoned.
you roast chicken tomorrow, but I cannot make you roast chicken today because it is so much better. The seasoning is not just the flavor.
So let's get into that. So exactly. So it is not just about adding depth of flavor, adding like penetrating the protein with like kosher salt. One thing to keep in mind, there's almost like a uniform way to season, and you season by weight. It's about 1%, right?
Yeah,
1 to 2%.
we came up with 1%.
1 to 2.
1 to 1.5. 2 is pretty
2 is a
salty.
little intense, yeah.
But we came if you just take 1%, which is great if you do the whole.
So
gram
sorry,
thing.
to back up, just to be super clear, we mean 2% of the. So your chicken weighs, 1,500 grams. You have a digital scale, so you're doing it at grams, and it's easy math. It's 1% of 1,500 grams.
1.5?
15.
15?
15 grams of kosher salt.
So that's why I use my iPhone it's for my favorite tool for the calculators and recipes.
But it's just thinking about all meat, and as you said, like pastor, maybe that's a quick 1 hour marinade or seasoning.
Let's call it an hour and inch.
Sure.
Let's just call it an hour and inch. You got a chicken. It's 11 inches tall.
I mean, on the fly.
and go 11 hours. Realistically, the truth is that at a certain point, the texture changes and you start to get a cured experience. So it's not like forever. But my rule of thumb is 1 to 3 days on chicken is great. Beef starts to get a funky kind of spongy texture.
Yeah, it messes the
after
texture.
24 hours. But I do think that the thicker, the longer. So if I was going to cook a roast, I would do it the night before. If I was going to cook steaks, I'd put it out in the morning and season it and let them cook.
And so this is not just a seasoning. This is actually, it changes the way this is roasted, the chicken. It actually helps with texture.
I believe what's going on is that the salt raises the boiling temperature.
Yeah.
And then the moisture inside doesn't boil.
Yep.
But when I said that before, some science-minded person called us out, and
We were on Sporkful, the podcast, and we were shut down.
Someone basically commented, they were like, well, you said this, but Bill Nye said this.
Literally
so which
cited,
is right?
Literally cited Bill Nye to shut us down.
Well, thank you so much I'm obviously wrong. But I do know that if you salt your chicken the day before, it tastes better, Bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about salmon? What about halibut? How are we thinking about like a pound or two of fish?
I think it's always the same thing. You put it on the scale and you go 1%, and you're never going to be unhappy.
What about timing?
I think 24 hours is for 20. Again, the thicker the better. You can make you can cure ceviche in 4 hours if you cut the pieces small. Right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is good. I wanted to get, and we'll wrap. I think we have.
That's my living room.
We have about 10 more minutes, or we have 20 minutes.
That is
to talk.
my living room. Our living room.
This is always asked, like, what are you cooking? And this is Daniel's cookbook collection, which is fun. And let's just quickly. I think this could go in many directions. I like to cook Korean cuisine. I write cookbooks with.
Do you cook Korean a lot at home?
I do as much as I can. It's not like I do bokkeumbap, like fried rice, like pretty regularly. Tenjin I'll do once in a while. I just enjoy cooking it. That's the one that I cook it pretty frequently.
I think it's my favorite thing to do is to just get excited about a different cuisine, learn about it through cooking it, go find the supermarket that has the appropriate ingredients, buy those ingredients, dork out. And that's why if you were to go into my cabinet and you're like, oh, I need soy sauce, I'm like, great, I've got 11 types of soy sauce because you can't make food from this country without using that right soy sauce, which is a little crazy, but it's also the whole point and the fun of it. I don't know.
We take a lot of pleasure in cooking. I think there's something to be said about the project element of cooking, which means if you need to unplug from your busy day and you're you want to kind of calm the chaos and follow these directions and make something. There's something to that about cooking. We've heard that a lot from readers of the book and just people in life.
I mean, if you can meditate just sitting there, God bless you. But I need to be doing something.
It's true. But is there a cuisine that you've found yourself making at home a little more recently?
I love Chinese food. I know that it's just I love Chinese food. I find it to be so fascinating and delicious, and there's so many incredible ingredients, and there's so many regions, and there's so much to learn, and there's so much technique. It's like one of the really, truly extraordinary cuisines of the world, and it's like, so I like to cook Chinese food.
Yeah, we have a question in the second chapter, which is tools and technology, about buying a wok. Woks aren't expensive. Carbon steel wok you can get for like $30. And getting your wok seasoned is pretty easy too. And it's like a great investment.
I just think there are rules to cooking that we learn, and then you learn a different cuisine, and you're like, you know, I learned how to make chicken soup, classic chicken soup, French chicken soup. You build your flavors, you do it this way, you saute this, you add this, and then you're like, then I learned how to make the Mexican chicken soup, and they're like, you just put all the ingredients in the pot and you bring it to boil. I'm like, that's not going to be good. And I'm like, it's better. So why did and then you learn how to use a wok, and it's like a completely goes against the cooking that I've learned. And it's
like wok hay, like that high temperature steel cooking, that like almost burning of produce called wok hay.
The first, my friend Kyle's, he just put all the vegetables in the wok and didn't put any oil on there and turned on the fire, and he didn't stir them, and they were burnt, and I was like, what is this guy doing? And then they were delicious.
It's something about when you get the vegetables at a favorite Chinese, if it's like Cantonese style, it's like umami. It's like that like char bit that burnt, not burnt, that's like negative, but
we talk about charred also, like when char as a texture, as a flavor versus burnt.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like a fine line. So be thinking about your questions. We have a couple more here, but I definitely want to get some from the audience. So this comes up a lot on the podcast and just in general about restaurant culture. And, I wanted to ask you, this is not in our book because things have certainly changed since they've gotten...
Why are restaurants? Because we shop at the farmer's market.
Yeah, no, exactly. Very good answer. Very quick. There's two parts here. So the first is to you, like, as an operator... When people talk about slice prices or even your parm prices, they've been creeping up in the past couple years.
I'm not an economist, so what I can see is when I was started out in the industry, the traditional profit margin for a restaurant was 20%, and now when you talk about where the gold standard profit margin is, it's like 12%. Yeah. And so the prices have grown recently, only recently, but it's disproportionate to the costs. And I think as more and more restaurants open, it artificially suppresses the price increase because, I open a slice shop, it's a new restaurant, and I want to keep the prices low, so I attract customers. And I'm like, I'm willing not to make any money.
For the first 6 months to a year, yeah.
But then I go out of business because I didn't charge enough, but then there's always another slice shop opening up.
Yeah.
And what we run into is, unfortunately, look, America was built on exploitation, and it's great for the exploiters, not awesome for the rest of the folks that are getting exploited. And the restaurant industry is no different. When I was working in my life, I worked for $10 an hour, and $9, $8, and $10 an hour. It's kind of later on, and it was not enough to have a living. And it's fine to say, hey, you're a kid learning. But, my employees are not kids learning. And so, they need to be able to afford a real life. And if you want a person that's going to live a real life that you're not literally exploiting, I don't have the luxury of making my sneakers overseas in a country where they pay kids $4 a day and then bringing them back here. If I could do that with my pizza, I'd sell it for you cheaper. What do you want me to say?
Yeah,
you know what it costs to live in California, and if you want to come work for me and be stoked about it, you got to get paid.
And labor and equity with the labor side is like such an important issue too. And I think
was that all terrible and rude?
No, yeah, I think we'll see. The YouTube comments will certainly dictate that one. I think no, it's a good point, and I definitely think one idea is like, do we dine out less and pay more, and does that work?
I think that, again, we do a good job in America of feeding people. There's not a lot of people going terribly. We're not starving on the streets, although, we could do better.
Yeah.
And But I personally think that spending more, less often on better quality is what I choose for myself.
Yeah.
And really, if you want to lower the cost of your food intake and increase the quality, the number one thing you can do is buy the Food IQ cookbook and learn how to cook, because it's the greatest.
That's funny.
It's the
Right.
greatest gift you can give yourself if you learn how
Yeah.
to cook and you cook for yourself.
It's
And
good.
then when you're standing there for 3 hours and you remember to soak your beans the night before, you'll appreciate the fact that somebody, like when you come to my restaurant and you eat the meal and you see me putting the, finishing touches and throwing the slice in the oven, you're not seeing the fact that someone was there at 6 o'clock in the morning prepping for 8 hours to get us there. That's just the truth.
Yeah. On the note of reservations, I think we're in this culture of like reservations being harder than ever. At least in New York City, we felt that. And why is it impossible to book a reservation? My answer is I think food as cultural currency is higher than ever, especially with folks with some disposable income. And I think with the labor shortage that we have as an industry, or the restaurant industry has, it's kind of impossible to operate at 100% capacity at times.
Supply and demand, private equity money poured into the restaurant industry in the 90s, and, restaurant openings outpaced population growth 10-1 for 10 years straight. We had too many seats, and then Uber Eats came in and started delivering to people's homes. People stopped going out to restaurants. Restaurants started to falter. And then the pandemic was literally like the brick that broke the camel's back, and all the restaurants closed. And now there is probably the right number of restaurants and seats out there. And thankfully, private equity is too scared to give us money to open too many. And so it's kind of a good balance where the restaurants are booked.
Yeah, it's a great. I'm glad you brought it up, because it isn't all negative. I know, if you're the end user and you can't book a table at Laser Wolf or at Wolf, what's the one that's Wolf?
The Wolf here, Mother Wolf, Laser
Mother Wolf, sorry,
Two hottest
Laser-
restaurants are both Wolf-based.
Yeah, the one in New York. So right. It's like early 2000s, like indie rock with the Wolf bands. I felt like
I think it's a Roman thing because of the lupa.
it's it. I think it's Italian. So, but I think it's frustrating for us. But to your point, really, really strong that we're at a level of like balance with equity, more equity for workers. Restaurants are making a little more money now than they were 2 years ago.
I charge $4.50 for a plain slice of pizza, and I think to myself, I would complain about this because I'm like, I feel bad about it. And in the past, I've undervalued and undercharged, and realistically, like, I've suffered for it, and I haven't been able to pay my employees enough, and then my employees have quit, and I've had trouble with turnover, and it has been, and now for the first time, my restaurant is sustainable.
It's good.
And I say, you know what, like, this is a real sustainable, honest operation that works for everybody. Like, where a person can work in a blue-collar profession and feel proud of the work that they're doing because they're providing a service, and be compensated in a way that they are that they can provide for their family. It feels good to me. A lot better than saying I pay my guys $9 an hour and I fire them every 3 months because I'm digging the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah,
Feels good to me.
2 restaurants that you like right now in LA, and I'll give you whatever my take. But I want to get.
I like Ms. Lala
Oh, okay.
a lot. I like the new Ms. Lala in West Adams.
Why? What's the deal? I don't know.
It's just absolutely phenomenally delicious. It's and it's just a fast casual kind of Mediterranean restaurant. They've always been a great restaurant in Sherman Oaks with a sit down tablecloth, but this is a fast casual version. It's awesome, and they make a halva shake,
Oh, that's cool. I
which
like
is
that.
so delicious.
Another one comes to mind.
That's the only restaurant.
I went to Squirrel this day. I think Squirrel is still like super.
What's our other favorite restaurant? No idea.
No. All right. Well, that would.
What? Where is it? Oh, Otafuku. That place is phenomenal. If you ever go down to Torrance or go to Otofuku,
Yeah,
that's got to be the best. That Japanese restaurant is phenomenal. It's a izakaya, and it's like there's a lot of big Japanese based companies in Torrance, and there's just like a lot of folks from Japan coming in and out of the restaurants. That restaurant is Otofuku.
Yeah, Otofuku's cool.
Is so damn good.
Yeah. I was just saying, Squirrel, I went this morning. I feel like Squirrel is like super on point right now.
She got canceled.
I guess so. Some would say.
There was like moldy jelly or something.
Another,
she got in all
another
kinds of trouble.
conversation. I just think it's a great restaurant.
By the
I'm a
way,
huge fan.
on the moldy jelly point, if you have moldy jelly in your fridge, scrape it off the top.
Exactly.
The jelly's just fine.
Exactly. All right, so we have a few more minutes. Let's start with questions. Kevin, you want to start, or do you have a wrap up? I'm sorry.
No. We're good. We got time. Everyone's having a good time so far?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
let's give him a hand,
You guys
right?
have been great.
Great talk.
Thank you very much for coming out.
All right, so my man Steve here has got a microphone, so if you have a question,
Okay.
raise your hand. And please remember, a question ends with a question mark, not a period or an exclamation point.
This is like Jeopardy.
Yeah.
Oh, this is like, you probably have to say that a lot. Okay.
Yeah, because sometimes you get a lot of not questions.
Yeah. You can-
Hey, my name is
Hi.
my name is Tiffany. I'm a food stylist here in LA. My question is, what is the best mise en place for potatoes? Like if you're doing a mashed potato or a gnocchi, do you boil potatoes from cold water? Do you boil them from hot water? Do you peel them first? Do you bake them on salt? Or do you russet
This is
potatoes,
like a
yellow
great
gold
question.
potatoes? Yeah, sorry, that was a three-parter.
No, great question.
It's just a great question. I've got potatoes. What's the best way to prepare them? For mashed potatoes, personally, my favorite thing to do is use a Yukon Gold potato, and then I don't peel it, and then I mash it in my KitchenAid mixer with the paddle, and the peels stick to the paddle, and so you like peel them after you cook them, and they have a very tender texture. For a traditional like Kennebec based mashed potato, I would boil it. The thing about boiling is I would peel it and then boil it. But then what I do is I let it steam. So I pour it out and I let it steam, and that steam pulls off the moisture. So I add more room for the butter. Heat, melt the butter.
So
If
the
I'm
paddle-
doing gnocchi, I bake the potatoes.
Yeah, our recipe is pretty great for the
bake the
baking.
potatoes.
But back to the paddle technique, that's a roast, right? You're roasting.
No, I boil them.
You boil with skins on.
I
You
love Yukon Gold
You boil with
potatoes.
skins on, okay.
They're my favorite. I just go crazy for
Yeah,
it.
Yukons are great.
Unless you can go to if you can afford them, and you go to that Weiser farm. They always have these at the farmers market. They've got these potatoes that are like spectacular. The German butterball potatoes.
Oh yeah, those are awesome, like that. More questions. There's gotta be some more.
Thank you. That
That
was
was
a great
great
question.
Thank you so much. That was a great question.
Anyone else? All
Okay.
right. Individual.
Hi, you had talked about the temperature, like with cooking the chicken and going under. What about if the outer part of the chicken is done, but there's red inside towards the bone? Is that still safe to eat if the outer temperature is at a certain level?
Yes. The short answer is actually, so the reason that folks get sick from like ground meat with E. coli specifically in ground meat is that the bacteria lives on the outside, you grind it up, and then it gets through to the inside, and then you cook a rare burger and it's rare on the inside. Chicken, when people are afraid of salmonella dies once it's cooked. But you get a crossover contamination. What happens is you cut your raw chicken on your counter.
pop it back on
you
there.
cook something else, but you put your raw something else on that, and you get sick from the bacteria. Once you cook the outside, for the most part, you're safe. And so, I've eaten a lot of like completely raw chicken
in Japan. In particular, Japanese chicken is usually super pink and underdone. Like
I've eaten like raw chicken in Japan. That's like normal.
Yeah.
But the blood around the bone and in the knuckle of the chicken is not going to get you sick. However, I don't, like that for me is I think that I prefer my chicken medium well. So I don't prefer my chicken rare. But I'm not afraid of the blood around the bone at all, no.
Yeah.
If I could do one more. What do you think about Michelin star ratings? Are they really worth it, like the different, even between 1 and 3?
I think it's a great question. Michelin Guide was created in France to sell tires, and it comes from a European-centric, gaze or point of view. The restaurant industry has very few kind of indicators of greatness. One is the review in your town. The other is James Beard Awards, which is has gone through massive changes in the past couple of years. Michelin in particular is usually, I think of it as a signal for people coming to New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco or Seoul. It's usually like for that European traveler. So I don't typically value the Michelin as much as others. And I also...
But you would value it for its like opulence and service. If you go to a 3
Good
Michelin
point.
star restaurant,
Good
you're
point.
going to have great service
The 3
and an opulent environment. So if that's what if you want to like impress somebody with that,
Yep.
but it doesn't necessarily speak to the food is going to be the most delicious.
The best food you're ever going to
It
have.
also means it's going to be expensive.
That's
So
the
a
other
great
thing,
way
too.
of knowing if it's
Yeah, the
expensive.
3s are definitely, there's always like a tier. They can automatically charge a certain level with the 3.
Have you been to a 3 Michelin star restaurant and then
Bernardin?
left away disappointed?
No, I mean, I don't go to too many 3s. I guess I don't even think about 3s, to be honest. But
I think it's such a hard question. It's a hard
great.
one because I personally don't love to eat a long fancy meal. That's not the way I like to eat. I get bored. You send me, with 4 hours of
Yeah.
sitting there, I'm like, unless the next meal is my bed, my next next course is my bed.
that's why that's why they're Bernardin in New York. It's like 5 courses tight. Yeah.
So I think
Great question.
I don't think you go to a 3 Michelin star restaurant and get disappointed until you get the check. But I don't seek it out in my life for my food, and I think as a chef though, man, it's such a thing. It's such a it's like it's like. Does the Oscar really mean the person's a great actor? But it must feel good to get up on stage and receive an Oscar. It must feel good,
it's an honor to be nominated. And as I said from there are very few like metrics of greatness in the industry for restaurants. So
I always look at that Thai crab omelet lady, which wears the goggles, and she's got, is that Thai? No, she's got a Michelin star. Maybe it's not Thai, maybe it's... It's anyway. I always look at that. I'm like, I want to go to that restaurant.
Yeah,
she got a Michelin star and it's street food.
Yeah, please. More questions. I think does this mean we're running out of time, Kevin? Or
We're
let's
pretty
take some more
good. Does
questions.
anybody else?
Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Well, that means we're running out of time.
Yeah, Kevin, do you have one question? No.
I guess I could have a question for myself personally. It's not going to be the one we talked about, so haha.
Oh, great. There we go.
All right. What's a quick breakfast someone can eat regularly if they have an egg allergy, such as myself?
Wow.
Yeah, it's tricky, huh? I eat a lot
A
of
quick
cold
breakfast
hamburgers.
with an egg, but just egg.
And without
Yes.
promoting Kellogg's or Post?
I mean, I'm like Greek yogurt hive. Like I go straight.
Oh,
Greek.
you're a yogurt guy?
Yeah. I mean,
Yogurt.
yogurt to me is the best breakfast.
You don't do you're not a like a granola or a
Kind
green
of, but
person?
like I get up so late and I'm already rushing to get my kids to school and then to
Yogurt.
work. I'm just like, whatever I can shove down my maw as quickly as
yogurt.
possible.
I've
Yogurt.
heard that cold pizza
Oh,
makes
yeah.
for great breakfast.
I mean,
Thank you.
so no advice other than granola and cold pizza.
That was a hard pass.
I think that's gonna wrap
Yeah,
it up.
thanks, guys. Really appreciate you all coming
Yeah,
out.
thank
Really,
you. So
really
can we give 'em
appreciate it.
another hand?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.